So I want to thank everyone for attending today. Welcome to OnFrontiers webinar regarding Cpars, the Contractor Past Performance Assessment Reporting System, and specifically talking about Cpars ratings. I am James Black. I will be with you throughout this webinar, and I'm joined by our panelist, Cindy Gaddis, who I'll introduce in just a moment. But thank you, everybody, for being with us this afternoon. So our summary of our discussion, apologize for that technical glitch there for a moment. Why are we here? Well, we're here to talk about using your knowledge network to improve your contractor past performance assessment report and your rating, right? So we're going to talk about OnFrontiers and its federal experts will help talk about the importance of the Cpars rating in the big picture and help describe some strategies to help you elevate your score. Within the context of our discussion of Cpars ratings, our contractor assessment reporting system, we'll talk about 4 main strategies for improving your Cpars rating. First, talk about knowing when a Cpars is required, the regulations, and having a plan. Second, we'll talk about the little known areas of the regulation that can affect your rating. Thirdly, we'll talk about how you wow your government team before they start the rating process. Before your rating comes out, how can you wow them? Which means you have to have a plan to do that. Fourth, we'll talk about the bad ratings, the things that happen sometimes that were unintended. Well, how do you challenge those bad ratings to elevate your score to a higher rating? We'll talk about strategies to do that as well. Lastly, we'll also review a tool to help you with your performance, tracking your performance outcomes. Say, courtesy tool provided by Cindy, and we'll look at that a little bit further to help you plan for and execute an exceptional Cpars rating, which should be the goal in any organization. As we go through our discussions today, we encourage you to please ask questions. So please feel free to ask panelists questions as they come up. We want to encourage participation. So at any time, please raise your hand during the presentation, and please feel free to ask. We will also have a 15-minute block at the end of the presentation for any questions or comments, concerns that maybe were not brought up or addressed during the presentation, and provided some additional time for a dialogue with our participants. So thank you very much. So let's talk a little bit about OnFrontiers first. What are we here to do? Well, OnFrontiers is changing the way that companies get smarter on demand. We like to think, or we like to say, that we help organizations learn faster. How do we do that? Well, we do that through having our experts play a more meaningful role in the work of any organization. We're here to solve a problem. We believe that there's a core problem in most organizations, and that is that knowledge is trapped. It's often found stuck in or trapped in silos, and that professionals can't access information fast enough to make good decisions, right? Or to pivot, or to change directions quickly, right? Or to be informed about a bid opportunity that maybe they should pursue or maybe not pursue. And because of the highly specialized domains within the federal community, we think that accessing this information is even more complicated. So we try to aggregate within our network federal experts that can help throughout the entire acquisition process so that organizations can learn faster and that knowledge can be transferred faster at the speed of need. So we're very, very fortunate today to be working with you and having a panel of our experts to talk about Cpars. Right? So what's our solution? Our solution is what we call the vortex of trust. We build proprietary networks of experts to assist companies beyond their normal reach, beyond their employees and the skill sets and knowledge of their employees or close affiliates and consultants. Our network of over 35,000 experts is there to help provide augmented information, knowledge, advice, etc., to your company. So our solution takes advantage of this large network or ecosystem. What does it do for the government contractor community? Well, it creates win-win-win solutions, right? It helps small and mid-sized companies differentiate themselves through intimacy with their customer, but through use of our experts. Our experts receive compensation through our platform, and it allows us to break away from those high fee-based brokerages. And the government receives optimization of their mission due to unbiased and independent expert advice in all phases of the acquisition framework. Specifically in our discussions about Cpars today, Cpars is generally thought of as a post-award administration function. However, within the acquisition framework, Cpars really fits into 3 phases. It fits into the acquisition planning phase, the award phase, as well as the post-award administration phase. And so during our discussions today, with Cindy and myself, we're going to talk about how you can leverage our network of experts to help you in the acquisition framework, or how you can just simply better plan your Cpars activities so that you can have better opportunities for strategies at pre-award, award, and post-award. So a little bit more about OnFrontiers. We're founded in 2014. Right now, over 100 plus clients and over 35,000 experts in our network. Our experts include experts within the federal government space, folks that were former program managers, former contracting officers, former source selection decision authorities, former requirement generators, right? Folks that use the tools and technologies that have been provided to government through contractors for a long time. So they have unique insights. And we continue to grow. And Cindy is one example of a teammate that has grown on the OnFrontiers network with us. So our introduction for today is a discussion about Cpars and Cindy Gaddis, who is a federal contract management expert. She comes to us with 15 years of working in industry in marketing, bid development and capture, has learned the Cpars process from not just book smarts, but from doing. And so we're really glad to have her with us. Not only does Cindy have a current knowledge and background in this area, but she's a subject matter expert from her knowledge and background in the Army. She was in the Army for a period of time, working as a program officer. She also is a speaker, very vocal at the Procurement Technical Assistance Centers, or PTACs, helping small businesses understand the federal government processes, and gives insight there. And she's also a published author, co-author. So very glad to have Cindy here with us today. Cindy, would you like to share a little bit about yourself?
Well, those are all good things. Experience matters, but probably the thing that people think is the coolest thing about me is that while I was becoming a public speaker and co-author, I lost 100 pounds, climbed Mount Fuji, and ran my first marathon before I turned 50. So the year before I turned 50. People really like those things better. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Cindy. I appreciate it very much. Glad to have you with us. A little bit about myself. I am an expert on OnFrontiers federal network. My background is federal acquisitions and the regulations that govern it in all areas, from Department of Defense to other agencies such as NASA or USAID. My background by way of 26 years in acquisitions with the Air Force, Department of the Army, and then as an independent consultant for the past few years, teaching the acquisition workforce about contract regulations, program officers about project management, etc. I was a source selection decision authority, also served as a director of contracting. So I've worked with the workforce that's doing the task of both writing the performance assessments as well as working with contractors to help them understand the process and help navigate the process of Cpars. So Very glad to be with you. We had a third panelist who I just want to briefly describe, Bill Kendall. Unfortunately, he was unable to attend due to pressing concerns regarding end of year activities, as I'm sure you're quite aware. But Bill Kendall is also an expert on our network, and unfortunately, just could not make it because of competing interests or competing activities, I should say, at this time of year. So apologize for that change, that last minute change to our agenda. But in any case, before we get started, I've talked a little bit about our strategy and things that we're going to talk about in the slides. But Cindy, before we move on, I wanted to ask, is there one big picture thing or insight that you would like to share with this group, that you would like for them to know and carry forward before we get into the more detailed areas or discussions?
Well, two things. What I've learned through reading is important, but I will tell you that having learned this firsthand through doing, nothing I'm sharing here is written outside the FAR. Anything that's not in the FAR is lessons learned from my own experiences as a defense contractor. Number two, people think of Cpars rating as how your grade is performed for the work that you're performing now. You're just given a grade. It's more important than that and can actually determine whether or not you win your next bid. So those are the big overarching why everything that we say here matters: practical experience and your next bid.
That's great. Yeah, thank you very much for sharing that insight. I would also offer, in addition to those things that you said, which are right to the point about why Cpars matters, is I like to think about it in terms of, you know, when preparing for college or going to college, you rely very heavily on your scores coming out of high school, right? Your scores in high school are not necessarily going to be, you know, how they're reflective of how well you did, but really more reflective from a college perspective of how well you're going to do in the future, right? The capabilities that you possess in the future. And so Cpars is not just simply scoring how well you did on one program, but how well you're going to do possibly for another agency, on another program, maybe larger scope, all different things that these Cpars ratings are used for, and really need to be able to speak to multiple audiences, right? They need to be able to capture what you've done, what you've achieved, but also speak to the next audience that might be reviewing your Cpars for a future opportunity of a source selection that speaks to them and says, this company can do the work because it's been demonstrated in their Cpars reports. Right? So look forward to having more discussion about that as we go on. But thank you so much, Cindy. And let's talk about some of the basics. For those of you that don't know, or maybe are not familiar with Cpars, you know, intimately, let's talk about the Contractor Performance Assessment Reporting System. So what is Cpars? Well, first of all, it's a web-enabled application that can be found at www.cpars.gov. Right? And the government uses it to evaluate past performance of its contractors, or I should say the performance of its contractors. Right? This is related to prime contractors, right? The ones that directly hold the contract with the government. Doesn't apply to subcontractors, but does not mean that in instances that there's not opportunities for subcontracting work to be recognized in the Cpars. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments, but these evaluations are used to evaluate past performance for future source selection purposes under previous contracts, which is what Cindy was talking about and what I was talking about how you're writing and you're really working for that future opportunity, right? And so what you do now in your score that you receive on Cpars currently is going to really very much affect your opportunities for future work. So when is it applicable? Well, it's applicable for all contracts and orders that exceed the simplified acquisition threshold. There are some exceptions to that. We'll get into the tables of when Cpars is required. But as a general rule, Federal Acquisition Regulation 4215 talks about you know, orders in aggregate above the $250,000 simplified acquisition threshold. Right? And they are to be evaluated annually if you have option years or when the contract or order is complete. And these are you know, really important documents because they are used for future source selection awards. So they should be marked as for official use only and source selection sensitive information. If you have any questions about current Cpars guidance, the most current guidance available for Cpars and the Cpars Users Manual are listed here, May 2021 and July 2021 for the User Manual. Cindy, is there anything you'd like to add regarding what Cpars is and how it's used?
Not right now. I think we're going to get into a little bit more anecdotal stories that we can speak to in future slides. But this is fantastic information and resources, and I highly recommend people go read them.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, thank you for so moving along in our discussions. What areas are rated, right? Well, first of all, technical area, the quality of the product or the service, right? So the technical areas of your contract are rated and scored, right? As well as your ability to control costs, right? Cost control is really important, especially under cost reimbursable type contracts. And that's why it's critical under cost reimbursable type contracts, not applicable to firm fixed price or fixed price with economic price adjusted contracts, because those are fixed price in nature. So by the very nature of that contract type, the costs are controlled. But under cost reimbursable type contracts, time and material, labor hour contracts, you need to be able to talk to how you have saved costs, avoided costs, or reduced costs in some way. Schedule and timeliness. How well have you adhered to the contract schedule? How quickly have you delivered? Have you delivered ahead of schedule? Have you delivered on time? Or for some reason, have you delivered beyond the scheduled requirements? There could be all sorts of reasons for why you deliver beyond the scheduled requirements, but if so, make sure you have a good justification for that, and that's documented in the Cpars rating, such as COVID could be a very good example or reason why maybe there's been some schedule delays, and that you'd want to make sure that that's described or annotated in the narrative of your Cpars rating. So then there's, of course, business and management relations. How well do you do in problem solving, right? How well do you do in solving problems without the government having to solve problems for you? Right? How well do you maintain business relationships with your client, right? Of course, we're always trying to have good relationships with our client, but how well are you doing with maintaining those at every level in your organization with your government client? And then small business subcontracting, if it's not awarded to a small business, if it's awarded to a large business and small business subcontracting is required, then that would be reported in your Cpars rating as well. How well did you do with your small business outreach? How well did you do with meeting the goals of your small business plan? And then there's other areas such as other areas to which the government has discretion in what will be rated, such as trafficking violations, and that's human trafficking violations, for example. That's, non-compliance with executive orders and clauses in the contract regarding that activity. And so it may be something that's reported as other, or tax delinquencies, or failure to report, or defective pricing. And
James
so
points out a lot of negatives here, but I will go to the positive and also say things that aren't mentioned. If you took on a new body of work within this scope, called out, for example, one of the organizations for whom I worked, we took on the additional tasks of risk management framework, and the contracting officer used this category to give us credit for doing that body of work. So not just negative, but it can also be positive examples for their category. Did you catch that okay?
Yes, we did. Thank you, Cindy. Now we had a question. Yeah, and it's a very good point. You're right. When we're thinking about these areas that are rated, it shouldn't be just simply, from a negative perspective, how did we score, but where do we look for opportunities that can increase our rating and as well. So there was a question regarding small business subcontracting, and specifically the question was, if I could bring it up here, if you're a small business, and so far I've only subbed for a government example of USAID, international development work, how do you go about asking for a Cpars? Do we ask our prime to advocate to USAID to do the Cpars? So it's a really good question, because subcontracts are not required to be rated in Cpars. However, they may be rated if the subcontractor is participating, providing a substantial amount of participation in the activity of the prime, right? And so I want to just quickly describe for specifically regarding USAID. USAID actually has a requirement that if the sub is providing 25% or more of activities to the prime under their subcontract arrangement, then they should be described in the narrative of the either in the area of other or in small business subcontracting. Right. So the government, who has the responsibility for writing this narrative, needs to be informed of your activity. And so you should go to your prime and let them know that, you're providing, X number of percentage of work or a substantial involvement in the work, and you would like for your information to be recognized in the narrative of the subcontracting activity. So there are ways, even though the sub is not necessarily being scored, it's the prime that's being scored. There are ways for you to work with the agency to get this information recognized in the Cpars report. So, Cindy, did you have anything additional to that comment?
It's back to have relationships with your prime. Good job. They'll probably want to. The better job you do, the more they're going to want to go back for you and make that happen.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Manage those relationships with your prime. Talk about how you can be developed if you're working underneath them, right? How can you be further developed in your government work, and how can they assist you there, and have those strong relationships. So know the requirements, right? Have a plan for collecting and reporting the information. But in order to do that, you got to know what the requirements are, right? And so know the applicability, know that not all contracts require ratings. It's based off of the business sector and dollar threshold of the contract award, right? In addition, the point I want to highlight here, and then I'll turn it over to Cindy to further the discussion, know the differences between your agencies. One of our participants has said that they're working with USAID. Well, there are some differences between the agency's supplemental guidance that they provide regarding contractor past performance assessment reporting from other agencies. And so just a couple of examples. The Commerce Acquisition Manual, their thresholds are different currently than what's being published on this table. Right? Or Department of Homeland Security has a deviation in the FAR that says that Cpars will be done for supply acquisitions in value of over $500,000. And GSA, for example, also has a deviation that says that buys that are under FAR Part 41 are exempt, right? And FAR Part 41 talks about the buying of utility services. Right? So all these nuanced things you need to know about. You need to know the customer that you're engaging with, the agency that you're working for. So for, if you're working with NASA, they require some information in the narrative regarding safety record or environmental preferable products. So know the agency. So Cindy, do you have any advice on how someone could get to know the agency and know some of these nuances?
Oh, wow. There are so many different ways. So almost every major agency has their own social media. They have a website, a social media presence, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. There's so many different ones. And they teach their mission statement, what they're set out to do, their upcoming opportunities. So it takes some time investment to get to know. And I liken it to dating, right? You wouldn't just walk up to a total stranger and said, hey, will you go out with me? You spend some amount of time getting to know if you're even compatible. So that is worth the effort and time with it. And on this last point that James has on the slide, the contracting officer does have discretion to give the Cpars. While these thresholds are required by the contracting officer or their representative, this is an additional duty for them to do a Cpars rating. And it's not always easy, but I will give you an example, and I can't cite the case, but it did go to the GAO. A company had not fallen within one of these thresholds. They were required to hire X number of people, and the entire first year of the contract, they never met the requirement. The contracting officer obviously was so upset, they gave them a scathing review officially on Cpars. And they kind of didn't think much about it. They just kind of kicked it to the curb. But the next thing they went to bid on, they lost, and they attributed it in part to this bad Cpars rating. It was for an entirely different body of work, an entirely different customer, had nothing to do with the work that was going to be performed on this new bid. GAO upheld that decision to say, no, all Cpars ratings, all past performance, whether it's in a Cpars posted on Facebook, it goes back to your business integrity, ability to perform in the past, and however that contracting officer can get it, it can be detrimental to the future. So if you do bad enough, don't think that you're going to escape a review just because they're not required to give you one. They still can. So just always set out to do your best would be my best recommendation there.
Yeah, absolutely. So set yourself up for success by always wanting to achieve that highest mark possible, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So we have a poll question that was put up, is just to see if you know we're putting some knowledge into your heads here about Cpars. How often are Cpars required? I hope everyone's had a chance to vote on that and submit their response. But it's annually, right? If there's an option year or when the contract is completed, right? So remember that on an annual basis, you will get a Cpars rating. Okay. So just an expert tip from our federal experts here. Read the request for proposal. Okay. Read the request for proposal, know the contract, and engage your customer. Right. Cindy, why do we say read the RFP instead of just read the contract? When we're talking about reading the RFP, why does that matter?
Mostly because they'll have requirements that are, just like you had described earlier, different than the average thing. I actually had somebody call me yesterday and said, hey, can the government actually put in what our benefits have to be as an evaluation factor? I said, yeah, they can. I said, especially if high turnover might be a problem for their project. And so reading the solicitation is absolutely critical. But also when it comes to Cpars, in order to get the exceptional, and I'm always going to, hey, what I got to do to get an A kind of person. In order to get exceptional, you have to meet the basic requirements of the solicitation. And if you can't meet the basic, it doesn't matter how over the top you do in one area. If you fail to do, provide 3 FTEs, if you've done that one thing to fail according to the RFP, then there's no way you can get exceptional.
Yeah, that's a great point. So know what they're looking for, and you're going to get that from the very beginning, right? By understanding the request for proposal that they put out. Don't wait to contract award to figure out your Cpars strategy of how you're going to get that A. You should already be thinking about building that in, and obviously you did if you won the contract, because probably your quality assurance plan or something indicated to the government that they had a high confidence in your ability. But now, how are you going to carry that forward and execute that in the post-award execution period of the contract? So get to know your customer as well. Know a little bit about them in terms of what do they really care about, so you can have a plan on how you're going to not just meet their needs, but exceed their needs, right?
That's exactly right, James. That, one of the things that the RFP and the solicitation and the contract, they say a lot of facts. What they don't always say, and they rarely say, is there's something that is driving the acquisition. There's a problem they're trying to solve, and they don't always get to the heart of that. They could say, you know what, my network keeps becoming disconnected every 5 hours, and we don't know why, and it's bothering me, keeping me up at night because I can't keep, connectivity. And so they may not say that in the contract, but when you go to meet with them, they'll say, this is really bothering me. This is really keeping me up at night. And if you can solve those problems, then you're gonna come out looking the hero. And no matter how many other things may be going slightly wrong, you've solved a big problem for them.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Great point. Now, I've served as a reviewing official. And so, why is this important to know who the reviewing official is going to be? Well, because in matters of dispute, which sometimes unfortunately do happen, even though you're trying to wow your customer, some customers are just more difficult than others, right? And so there might be an opportunity where there's a or an intersect where there's a disagreement. So know a little bit about that reviewing official. Who's going to be reviewing this? What role do they play in the organization? How open are they to hearing from contractors? Do they have kind of an open door policy? Do they tend to be very balanced in listening to both sides of an argument or disagreement? Myself, I had an open door policy because I felt it was really important. Cpars is so critical to organizations today that you cannot afford to to not hear the contractor side of the story, right? So get to know that reviewing official and know who's going to be involved in the process if there was a dispute on your Cpars. So what are the Cpars ratings? Well, here's the rating scheme. All right, by definitions out of table 42-1. And this is just an example of 42-1. There's also another table for called 42-2, which talks about small business subcontracting. But nevertheless, you can see that they're pretty much the same in terms of the rating categories, the definitions of those ratings, and some notes in terms of how these ratings are achieved, right? So obviously, as Cindy said, she always wants to know how am I going to get the A or how am I going to be exceptional? Well, you're going to exceed the standards of the contract, not just exceed the deliverables of the contract, but also perform some tasks, some results that are to the benefit of the government and can be objectionably written and described, right? So they have to be clear, relevant, substantive information. The report has to be, comprehensive. It has to be based on facts. It has to be based on objective criteria, right? Now, I'm here to share that, the government is, a lot of folks are busy. The folks that are responsible for these Cpars ratings, the contracting officer representatives or the program manager, are often very busy, and Cpars isn't always at the forefront of their mind, right? So, Cindy, do you have any strategies that might be able to help guide the government in this rating activity that they must do?
I could probably spend about an hour just on this slide alone, but I'll in the interest of time, I'll keep it short. 2 facts you should know out of the gate for taking what James said to heart. This is an additional duty and time is short. And furthermore, you have the vested interest in making sure that your rating is exceptional. Contracting officer or the representative has 5, 10, however many other programs they're trying to run. You know your program better than anybody else. Another little factoid: in order to award exceptional or unsatisfactory, the contracting officer or their representative must provide a narrative to justify the rating. So they can easily give you very good or satisfactory or marginal and not have any extra work, right? So that's easy to do. Like I said earlier, to get exceptional, you have to first meet all the basic requirements, and then you have to go over the top. And people are sometimes confused by this. They're like, but you can't give anything to the government for free. True statement. But you can give them things that they that they need, that they haven't asked for. And I've got just a plethora of examples to go to, but I'll limit it to one. In this one organization I served, I ran a program for the missile defense systems, and we did a lot of testing. We'd have people, hundreds of people have to get together, ship out, and then come back, right? Well, one such occurrence, we had teed up 100 people to meet in Oklahoma, get trained up, deploy to the Pacific to do some missile defense systems testing. And everything was going along right, just perfectly. We had We had rallied everybody there and their training was about to begin. Then sequestration happened and it shut down the government. And our contracting officer made the decision, because they had no idea how long it was going to last, to ship everyone home. So we had to take, this was on a Friday afternoon, we had to get 100 people redeployed to their home station and put on hold. Now, a lot of people may go find another job because they need to work or what have you. And so over the weekend, very quickly, we sent everybody back home. And then on Monday, everything was resolved and they expected us to be right back on track. So they probably would have made allowances and understanding and forgiving and everything else, except we strive to be the exception. We want to be exceptional. So we had everyone back on site by Tuesday morning, got everybody trained up, and we didn't miss a beat on the schedule. We actually ended up finishing the project 3 weeks early. So that's exceptional. With all these other, like James mentioned earlier, COVID might be a good reason for you to be late, but it could also be a really good opportunity to be the hero, overcoming all of these obstacles to achieve what they wanted you to do. But all these obstacles stood in your way and you still managed to pull it off ahead of schedule. That's going to get you an exceptional rating. And always keep that in mind.
Yeah, great points. Thank you, Cindy. So with that, we take a little note from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which is begin with the end in mind, right?
Yes.
Start your Cpars. Cpar starts at contract award, right? Not as you're getting close to the end of the performance period, right? So know your agency, ask about what's important to them, know some of these things at the post-award orientation conference, right? Or what we call a kickoff meeting. Know what it takes to be exceptional and start setting those goals right away. Right? So Cindy, any additional emphasis that you'd like to place here?
Oh, this is another one, really, really important. Going back to what they say they want in the documentation and what they may really want to expect. So I call it expectation management. When you get to that kickoff meeting, if you have no other goal than to get from your evaluator's mind what is an A in their mind, what would be exceptional to them. That's where finding out those problems, those things that bother them, is an opportunity for a company to be exceptional for them. And then starting out right away, know what you can do based on the solicitation and what you know from the contracting officer, the representative, is you're going to be looking for anything around the, what'd you call it, James? The iron triangle.
The iron triangle, that's right. Yes.
Cost, quality, and time. If you can save them money, if you can improve their services, or you can improve the schedule and give them more time back, those are going to be the areas of focus where you're going to be looking to have an exceptional. I'll give you, for example, we had the same missile defense systems contract that we were working. It was a single award IDIQ, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity, if you're not familiar with that term. And so the single award, they would pop out a task order, give the company 10 days to respond to the task order to say, here's our plan of execution, basically. And then the period of performance would start sometime after that 10 days. That's how it was supposed to work. It didn't work like that. What happened was they would issue a task order on Friday with a period of performance that was to start Monday without giving us the 10 days to respond. Granted, we would have been well within our rights to complain, have a fit, say this isn't right. But since we knew the customer, we knew that they were a little lagging in issuing out task orders, we took it upon ourselves to meet with people to find out what was coming, and we would have a plan ready before we ever received the task order, so that we were able to pull together the team, provide the plan on Saturday, and be ready to perform the work on Monday. Out of 17 different task orders, we did this at least 10 different times. Again, do you think that we got exceptional? We did. So it is important to begin at the kickoff to get those expectations and then set those deliberate goals where you see opportunities to achieve exceptional. And that was out of the gate one of ours. Okay, they're giving us 10 days. We're going to take less than 10 days. The government's not getting anything for free. We're just doing things a little faster than they expected. And so as a result, we get to perform better.
Thank you. That's great commentary. And it led to a question that we had in our audience about, it appears that the government is not emphasizing or de-emphasizing giving exceptional ratings. So what can someone do to achieve exceptional? I think we want to go back and highlight that the government is not wanting to give exceptionals, but they want to really reserve those exceptionals for the contractors that are truly working above and beyond the tasks, right? And so going back to our standards, what does it take to achieve an exceptional rating? Well, you have to be able to demonstrate that there's either multiple singular events or multiple events or one single event that results in significant benefit to the government. And so I think to your point earlier that you made, when you can demonstrate that there was innovation, that there was responsiveness, that there was cost savings or cost reductions that ultimately benefited the government, that's what's reserved for those exceptional ratings, right? And that, when we can demonstrate where there was an increase to quality or responsiveness or schedule time, those are the things that should be reserved for exceptional. I think what you're seeing is not that the government doesn't want to give out exceptionals, but I think they're starting to be a little bit more conservative in really using the evaluation, the table at 42-1 to say what the standard is, which is satisfactory is meeting the requirements, exceptional means going above and beyond the requirements, right?
And Bonnie, that is a phenomenal question too, because I have heard, I was a consultant for a time as well. And I kept hearing every time I would go to teach folks on Cpars, a lot of people would say, my contracting officer just said point blank, they do not award exceptional. All they're going to get is very good or satisfactory. Well, my military mind would be challenge accepted, right? I'm going to figure out a way to make you eat your words kind of thing, and to demonstrate that. But that'll go into the Cpars tracker that we talked a little bit about earlier, and we'll talk into some more about how you can very specifically get to those exceptional ratings and kind of a break it down how to kind of way here in a little bit. But great question, Bonnie.
And everyone did well on that poll question that we asked about how do you achieve an exceptional rating. Everyone responded very well. Got to have those events, the multiple or singular events that exceed the contract requirements to the benefit of the government, right? Mm-hmm. So, all right. So let's see here. So tips, always respond, right? To your Cpars, make sure that you're always responding to the government's requests. Lean in, right? Cindy and I talked about this earlier this week. Lean in is the preferred method, which means get out there, draft the narrative before the government completes an initial Cpars, right? Emphasize your work in cost savings or cost reductions, how you've improved processes, etc. Right? Least preferred, but still possible is, being reactive, right? Your evaluation's already been provided. Still respond, even if exceptional. And why? Because it's speaking to your next opportunity. Cindy, I'll turn it over to you because I know that you have some very good insight in this area.
Oh yeah, so people see that fantastic, we got exceptional across the board, and just be like, check, and not say anything. Say something. If you got exceptional across the board, talk about the things that you did to make it happen. If the contracting officer didn't, speak well of your customer and how they are to work with. And basically you have this opportunity to speak to the next source selection board. The next thing that you're going to bid on, this is going to come out of the closet and they're going to look at it. And so what do you want to say to your next customer? And use the exceptional rating as the opportunity to do so. And it's really getting to have a conversation with your next date before you ever meet them. You know, your blind date is already getting to hear from you.
And
It says a lot.
I used to have regular contractors that would schedule quarterly meetings with me when I was a director, because they wanted to show me their narratives, basically not show me what they're going to write, but, you know, talk to me in a kind of a program perspective of the things that they've done to, you know, to actively support the program to the benefits of the government, how responsive they were, et cetera. And those engagements actually built into their narrative for their Cpars later on. And so they would have meetings with me, they'd have it with the program manager, with the core, various different individuals, to have those proactive meetings to discuss their activities, right? And I found that to be very beneficial, because generally everyone's very busy, memories can sometimes be short, and so you can't always rely on the government individuals as documenting this information, right? So I like something that you had said earlier, Cindy, about submitting the narratives, draft narratives to the government,
Yes.
that said, you know, for your editorial review, for your review and editorial comment, or something along
For
those
your
lines.
review and editorial consideration. I
Considerations,
have this,
right,
like,
right.
because you don't want to be rude and say, we don't think you can do your job, so I'm going to do it for you. But Bonnie, this is how you can assure you get exceptional. These folks are busy with multiple contracts. You know it better than they do, and you have a vested interest in winning your next bid. So if you track your success as you go, writing your own narrative for their editorial review and consideration, right? Then they can very easily go, well, yeah, I like that, or no, I don't like that, and they can edit it. Or, as I have seen, they can just clean copy paste. It's not that they want to withhold an exceptional rating nearly so much as it takes time. The exceptional, the highest rating and the lowest rating require a narrative from them. Knowing that, you're going to give them that narrative. You're going to make it easier for them, and you're going to do it by tracking it throughout, from beginning at the kickoff throughout the first year of the contract, so that they have it for them.
And that led to a
No,
question from the audience,
right.
Cindy, about that. So the pre-drafted narratives can be and should be sent to the assessing official, or you know, the contracting officer representative, whoever that role might be, and it's for their review and consideration, right? You're
Right.
not telling them that you need to use this language or that they should, but you're giving it to them and you're helping them. Remember, going back to the previous discussion about how can you help them? Well, part of the Cpars challenge is just simply getting it done. So if you can help them get it done and get it documented properly and accurately, right, then that's a benefit. So yeah,
It is. And you do submit them directly to the assessing officer. You can also submit them on a quarterly basis, Becky, but you don't need to. What I typically do is send them about 3 months before the Cpars were due, before they started working on it or spent any amount of time on it. 9 months into the project, I would send it off. If you think you're dealing with a really proactive go-getter, maybe make it 4 or 5 months in advance. But here's what we've done thus far. Quarterly is a good idea too. You know, this quarter, here's how we think we've done from a Cpars perspective, if you will. So that's a good idea as well.
Yeah, I
And
found that a quarterly cadence is sometimes enough time to gather enough information, to be reflective, to be insightful, where if it's too frequent, it might not add as much value.
right.
Too infrequent, too many things have been lost or forgotten along the way. So
Right.
great point. So let's talk now about things that I'll call the tripping hazards, right? You've done all the tips that we're talking about to get a better Cpars report, but you've forgotten some key things: to review some of the clauses in the contracts. Some of the clauses in the contracts, as it says here, inform, others dictate. Here's an example: the service contract inventory, which was implemented through a public law 111/117, requires non-DoD agencies to report services performed by contractors under the FAIR Act, right? And it's applicable to all cost reimbursable contracts over 250,000 and firm fixed price contracts over 500,000, right? This report has to be submitted by the contractor through the system of award management. So that's sam.gov, right? On an annual basis, right? If you fail to report this, it can be directly, or it actually states in the clause that the contracting officer shall reflect this in your Cpars rating, right? So this is one of those things that you're paying attention to the statement of work and the deliverables of the statement of work, and as Cindy said, managing the customer's expectations. But then there's these other nuanced areas where if you're not paying attention to all the clauses of the contract, right, you might find yourself still getting dinged on your Cpars because you weren't looking at it holistically. So compliance is really important. So it leads to another question. Performance of this contract should only be measured in terms of meeting an objective criteria of the statement of work, PWS, et cetera. Is that true or false? Give you all a second to decide that. And while you're deciding that, I'm going to go ahead and advance our slides to keep our conversation moving along. All right. So the answer to that question is it's false. It's false. You as a contractor have to be documenting and be able to describe how you're complying with all areas of the contract. All right. So make sure you're documenting your compliance with not just the statement of work deliverables, but other areas, those things that we talked about. Not that there would be human trafficking violations, I would hope, but that you're not contributing to those things. Other areas that need to be documented, your service contract reporting, that you're doing it timely and not getting dinged in that area, right? So have a compliance program, have someone tracking this information so that you can make sure on a regular basis you're documenting the narratives, right? That you're addressing performance issues quickly, and that on a regular basis you're holding some type of meetings and et cetera. And then don't forget about the subcontracting plan, right? That's a separate reporting that needs to be done within Cpars. Well, it's within the Cpars, but it's separate and needs to be addressed as well. Cindy, any additional thoughts here?
I think we hit every bit of this on the last meeting, on the last slide, but you're spot on. Don't forget the nuances.
So what should you know, or what should you expect to see in your Cpars rating? What's the process, right? Well, as Cindy had said, each rating needs to be documented, needs to be clearly supported by objective facts, right? So going back to, delivery times, and, 10 out of 17 events, you responded more quickly than the government's standard, right? Know these things so that you can pre-draft those narratives, right? All evaluation areas have to have a narrative. So be prepared for that. Submit your information to the government to help, right? And know that your contractor representative must concur or not concur with the government's assessment. But there's only certain timelines to which you can do that. The entire process has to finish within 120 days. The government has 60 days. Contractor has 60 days, right? But there's some key events that happen along the way. This role is critically important in your organization. Don't leave it to somebody that can't manage things, right? Leave it to somebody that you trust and that can properly oversee this. I saw time and time again from my government perspective, the point of contact for the contractor Cpars was no longer with the organization. So the Cpars, when it came time for rating, for concurrence or non-concurrence, was missed. The contractors didn't even know that their Cpars was due because the individual that was supposed to be overseeing it was no longer in the organization, right? Cindy, have you seen that, had that similar experience?
Oh my, yes. I actually had one client who didn't know what Cpars was, much less the fact that they were getting a rating. They were in year 4 of a 5-year contract. And so they couldn't get their folks to talk to them. And I said, well, how do your Cpars look? And they're like, our what? And they had to track it down. And apparently they've been getting these Cpars all along, and they had no input, no feedback, no rebut. After a certain amount of time, they were just accepted. And so it's a hugely missed opportunity. It ended up working out well. We were able to recover it. The proactive stance versus the reactive stance. We can't overcome the reactive stance if you're already well into the program, but it's easier if you're proactive and do that in advance. So, and it looks like I have a correction here. They did update this guide, and I did not read it, but it looks like even a satisfactory rating now requires a narrative report. That is an important thing, and I want to make sure I correct myself on that, because just exceptional and marginal used to be, but now I see that they've changed that, and so satisfactory too. You'll have to give a narrative for that.
Yeah, good catch there. So we had a question from our team here, and it was regarding I'm sorry, the reps. Will they be informed of the Cpars? Yes. If the right email address has been provided for the representative in the Cpar system, they will receive regular email updates. So that's why it's important you have the right individual identified, or else those emails will be going to somebody that's not paying attention.
I do recommend that every company set up a contracts at your company email address, and then that contracts email address can always be routed to multiple people, especially in a small company. Small companies, people go on vacation, leave, what have you, but somebody always sees it, and then you can start internally that dialogue, because it is an internal thing. The contracts manager doesn't operate in isolation. They'll talk to the BD folks, they'll talk to the program folks and say, okay, how are we going to respond to this? If you're in the reactive mode, but ideally you're working on this advance, and it's not going to be a shock to anybody.
So for the sake of time, because we only have a few minutes left, I want to quickly advance through some of our discussion, but remember, stay on the timeline, know what the timelines are. You as their contractor representative are only going to have 60 days to provide your response. There's some other critical dates in there. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time to get into all the timeline dates, but please make sure you know the process, stay on the timelines, get your concurrence or rebuttals submitted timely. Okay, so for the sake of time here, also recognize that there is opportunities to challenge a bad Cpars rating, right? There's a court case called Cameron Bell in the Armed Services Board of Contract Appeals, and it essentially says that if the government is arbitrary and capricious, which means that their evaluation narrative isn't logical, it's not rational in its conclusions or thoughts, then the government can be remanded to go back and not revise the Cpars rating, but require the government to follow the applicable regulations. And what that means is, if the government wasn't following the FAR out of table 42-1 for the guidance regarding exceptional rating and satisfactory, et cetera, and they're not documenting the narrative properly, they can remand the government to go back and relook at it. So a Cpars rating can be challenged under the disputes clause, but know that there is remedy. If you've gone through all this activity and all this work and you still don't think you've been fairly treated, it can be looked at, because the courts have set precedents in this area. Right? I'm going to go ahead and advance our slides again, Cindy, just to keep us moving along, and provide you just a few minutes to talk about tools that you're providing that can help folks plan ahead for their Cpars activities and receive the highest rating possible.
Okay, so I'd mentioned quickly that I know this stuff by doing it, and so here's what I did to make sure that we were tracking our success. I created a Cpars tracker. I trademarked it because it's important to capture your intellectual property. But at the same time, you guys can use this, please do. And each one of these areas are areas that James had already mentioned: quality schedule, cost control. These are what you're going to see on the various Cpars. They're going to be filled in. And what this tracker does, if you scroll on over to the quality, it's just a simple, if you can get the who, what, when, where, and why, or how many of within the topic of quality. For example, our program management team responded to task orders from January to February of 2018 for projects going from Oklahoma, White Sands, New Mexico, and Texas to the Pacific for missile defense systems testing, and we put 100 people there within 24 hours. Now, if you've never visited this little tiny island in the Pacific, getting planes there is difficult, and you've got the entire military test team, and you've got all the civilian personnel. Now you've got contracting personnel too, all trying to get to this one place. So meeting that requirement is pretty huge. And taking these different bits of information, you can build the narrative. But these are the facts that you have to have that James had pointed out. Be factual, be clear and consistent in everything that you're doing. So you can speak to quality, exactly the same thing for schedule, exactly the same thing for cost control, just break down. I like to equip this with our program managers or project managers who are responsible for putting this together. You know, they're responsible for tracking this stuff. I tell folks, if you have to report your time, there's a little place in there that you can put notes. If there's like really exceptional things that you've done, put it on a timesheet. I mean, there's got to be a feedback loop for whatever project you're doing. You don't just get awarded and say, good luck, you know, and send your team off. This is really critical. So I'm a certified project manager and I've run programs, but I'm also a business developer. And so I need this back from our program people in order to pour into the next bid. So that it has multiple uses, and it just takes deliberate, consistent, and attentive and, you know, focused on your project in order to do this. That's the hardest thing it is to get people into the habit of reporting the goodness of what they've done.
So thank you very much, Cindy. And this tool is available. If you'd like a copy of this tool, if you reach out to the webinar host, we can provide this to you. Happy to share this information. And thank you, Cindy, for being so gracious and sharing it with us.
My pleasure.
So again, folks, unfortunately, we've run out of time, but we thank you for this opportunity to talk about Cpars. If we have any additional time, we'd be happy to answer any questions that might be left. But at this point in time, absent of seeing any questions from the audience, and I'll give you a minute or so to do that, we want to thank you again for participating in this discussion about Cpars. I want to thank Cindy for your contributions to this discussion and your wealth of knowledge, and again, providing this tool as well. So thank you so much.
Great fun. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you, everybody.